The first time I saw a video of urban explorations on YouTube, I was completely hooked, and since then this became my favorite type of content, and there is nothing more exciting than seeing other people enter these abandoned buildings and somehow unravel their secrets. During the minutes that the video lasts, you connect with that person and explore with them without leaving your house. You feel the fear they feel, but also the curiosity and excitement of discovering what is hidden behind those old and crumbling walls. However, I later found out that many of these videos were fake, and in reality, most of what these YouTubers show you is simply part of a montage that is previously prepared. Knowing this caused me a lot of disappointment, and I wish I would have simply stopped following this content or looking for channels that were more trustworthy. But instead, I made the stupidest decision of my life. I decided to make this content myself, but 100% real. Realizing that many of my favorite YouTubers were actually lying to me all this time made me feel very angry and mocked. So I vowed that I would never lie to my audience and never make them feel the way they made me feel. What I didn't know was that this dream would be short-lived and that it would be a decision I would deeply regret. It didn't take me long to realize that watching videos from the comfort of your home is not the same as being there live. Sometimes you can encounter terrifying people or terrible accidents can happen, but other times things can happen that are beyond your imagination, things that no person should have to experience. Sometimes you encounter the unexplainable, and that's just what happened to me that night. It all started when my best friend and I started our first urban explorations. The first thing we did was check out an abandoned theater near our town. The government had started to build it in the middle of the elections, but once they won, they left the construction halfway, and it just sat there abandoned. You know, typical South American stuff. Anyway, the thing is that my friend and I saw the place from top to bottom, and the first thing we noticed was that there was a lot of graffiti and the place looked very vandalized, but instead of scaring us, this left us a little more calm. Because if people entered this place and had time to graffiti the walls, that meant that it should not be very dangerous to be there. We explored the whole place, filming everything we could. Then we came to a space that caught our attention, and that is that the theater had a door that seemed reinforced, something quite strange for a place like this. The door was metallic and was locked, and although we tried with all our strength to enter, it was impossible. It was obvious that other people had tried, because it was full of marks and dents, and on the floor there were a lot of pipes and tools that were surely used to force the door and try to open it, including a crowbar. That is, the lever that is used to open locks and doors by force. Although we assumed that, if it was lying there on the side, it is because they could not open the door with it, we tried anyway. But as expected, it was in vain. When we were trying to open the door with the goat's paw, although we did not manage to open it, we did manage to get it to separate from the edge by a couple of millimeters. And then a very strong smell started to come out of that small crack. It was very difficult to be near that place because of the bad smell it was emanating. But my curiosity was through the roof at that moment, so I came up with a phenomenal idea. The place was right up against a window, so I thought, what if we turned the place around and entered from the outside? Quickly, my friend and I exited the huge theater and searched for the window. We finally found it, but we noticed that it was too high. But we were far from giving up, so we started looking around for anything that could help us reach the window. We searched all over the yard and managed to find an old scaffolding which was probably used during construction. My friend and I moved it to the place where we presumed the window was, and while he held it, I began to climb up that old pipe until I reached the edge of the windows. It was a miracle that none of the old rusty pipes broke in the process. I went from window to window until I found the right one. I couldn't make out anything from the outside, so I turned on the chamber light to see what was inside, but almost immediately I wished I hadn't done so. The room was almost empty, except for one thing in the center, a chair in which a person was sitting. This person was covered by a sheet full of blood, which appeared to be old and dry. I could not believe my eyes. It was a corpse. I had never seen a dead body in my life, so I didn't know how to react. I panicked and jumped off the scaffolding, almost breaking my leg in the process. My friend was frantically asking me what I had seen, and all I could do was tell him that we had to get out of there as soon as possible. He was completely bewildered, but when he saw me run out, he ran after me. My friend didn't understand what was going on, but he was just as scared as I was. When we got far enough away, I finally told him everything I saw, but to my surprise, he laughed and thought that what I had seen was some kind of prop dummy. After all, it was a theater. The problem is that theater never worked, so why would there be a prop dummy with those characteristics in a room sealed with a security door? This left him a bit thoughtful, but be that as it may, he told me that he would never want to go back to that place. He wanted to be brave and laugh, but he was as scared as I was. After that, we went back to our homes, promising to upload the video the next day, before telling the police, as we might get in trouble for being there. Not to mention they might take our camera away. From the rotten smell, the body looked like it had been there for a long time. After that terrifying event, I arrived home, took a shower, had dinner with my parents, then went to sleep like any other night, not knowing that I was in for the scariest night of my life. I was sleeping peacefully in my bed when a horrible smell began to flood the atmosphere. The stench of putrefaction was so strong that I opened my eyes immediately, feeling suffocated. As my eyesight adjusted to the darkness, I remember starting to feel very cold. At that moment, I wondered why it was so cold, if we were in the middle of summer. Besides, I never wake up in the middle of the night. I am a very heavy sleeper, so every time I go to bed, I usually don't open my eyes until the next morning. I started looking around my room, looking for the source of that horrible smell, and quickly realized that something was different. When my eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, I could notice something at the foot of my bed, and when I got closer to get a good look at it, a scream of pure terror came out of my gut. There, at the foot of my bed, was the abandoned theater chair. Sitting on it was the bloody corpse of that man, covered with a sheet. I pinched myself to see if I was dreaming, and I could clearly feel the pain, so it was not a dream, although I already knew it was not. At that moment, I jumped out of my bed and tried to turn on the lamplight, but it didn't work. I stood up in desperation and went to turn on my bedroom light, but it wouldn't come on. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. It was like the sound of wood being dragged. I turned around quickly and realized that the noise was coming from the chair, which was turning by itself, slowly, from being in front of my bed to pointing directly in my direction. At that moment, I felt my heart jump up into my throat. My body began to tremble and panic gripped me from head to toe. I started screaming like crazy, running towards the door to try to get out, but it was completely sealed. And no matter how many times I turned the handle, it wouldn't go, so I started hitting it with all my strength and screaming for help. I was in a state of absolute panic, a feeling I had never experienced in my life. Not knowing what to do, I began to call my parents at the top of my lungs, but they seemed not to hear, as they never came to my call. Then I heard a noise behind me again, and as I turned around, I saw the chair slowly creeping in my direction, making a lot of noise as it moved forward. And to my absolute horror, I could see that behind the sheet, the corpse was moving. I watched petrified as his breathing became agitated and he opened his mouth wide, causing the sheet to push into it with every breath of air he tried to take. It was as if the person behind the sheet was suffocating, even making that whistling noise that someone who can't breathe makes. But clearly he was dead. So I didn't understand anything, but it was all terrifying. I was completely paralyzed, panicked, terrified, and very desperate to see the agony that person behind the sheet seemed to be going through. But I was unable to move a muscle. It was as if I could feel the terror in every cell of my body. so I just kept screaming in the hope that someone would hear me. And when the chair was finally in front of me and that corpse was less than a meter away, almost face to face with me, I had one last survival impulse. I ran around it until I got to my window and tried to open it to jump through it, but just like the door, it wouldn't move. It was totally stuck. Then I grabbed my night lamp, completely desperate, and smashed it against the glass. But it didn't break either. It was as if that whole room had been armored all at once. As I stood still in front of the window, consumed by panic and shock, the cold began to become more and more intolerable. I began to shiver uncontrollably, feeling myself freeze. That's when I instinctively turned around, and then my eyes widened in surprise and shock. The chair was now empty. The corpse covered by the sheet was no longer sitting in it. Instinctively, I began to look around my room, and that's when I felt someone hugging me from behind with one arm and placing his huge hand between my nose and my mouth, preventing me from breathing. The corpse was trying to suffocate me. I tried to free myself with all my strength, but I couldn't. The strength of what was holding me was much greater than mine, and suddenly it began to squeeze me with its forearm. He did it so violently that I thought I would die right there, while the corpse, or whatever it was, kept preventing me from breathing and trying to break my neck. I looked to the front where my mirror was, and I could notice his head, still covered by the sheet, was starting to fill with blood, but at that point I was at my limit. I no longer had the strength to try to let go, so I dropped my arms and slowly watched as everything started to go dark. But when I thought it was the end of me, suddenly, it was all over. My parents opened the door to my room and I fell to the floor, hyperventilating and almost unconscious. The chair was no longer in my room, and neither was the corpse. I started coughing nervously, trying to catch my breath, and my parents didn't understand anything that was happening. They picked me up off the floor and started fanning me with my pillow, trying to help me breathe. My mom was like crazy asking me what was going on, while Dad wanted to call 911, but I told him not to. I finally pulled myself together and went downstairs with them to the living room. Once there, I decided to tell them everything. At first, I thought they wouldn't believe me, but the hideous marks on my neck were more than enough to convince them that I was telling the truth. The marks were very clear, but in addition, my parents told me that when they entered my room, the way I fell from the floor was completely unnatural. It was as if someone was holding me in the air and just vanished. After a few hours, I went back to my room. The temperature had returned to normal, but I was not going to sleep. The reason I went into my room was because I was going to get a jacket, since my father was going to take me to the police station to report what I had seen inside the abandoned theater. Once we got to the police station, I told them everything I saw, but obviously, I didn't tell them what happened in my house, as they wouldn't believe me. I was not in trouble, fortunately, but they made me explain specifically where I saw the body, and then I had to go with them to the scene. Evidently, they found the body, and after that, they started the search to find the criminals who had taken this man's life. Shortly thereafter, they identified the victim and notified the family. He was a 35-year-old man who had been missing for several months. The family had received a message from his cell phone telling them that he had met a woman in another state and was going to live with her. Then he turned his cell phone off, and they were never able to contact him again. His wife was devastated, and during all this time she was thinking that her husband had betrayed her with another woman and abandoned her with their daughter, so the news was doubly devastating for her, and it was also very hard for her parents and siblings. Fortunately, I never received another visit from this man. To this day, I am trying to find out what happened, and the only thing I can think is that the ghost of this man appeared in my room because he knew I had seen him, and perhaps he wanted me to feel firsthand what he felt, to force me to go to the police. The autopsy revealed that the man was subjected to multiple tortures, including asphyxiation, before finally being shot in the head. This man demanded understanding and justice. Even after his death, he needed his family to know what had really happened to him. His soul was probably haunted by the pain his loved ones were suffering, and he desperately needed someone to do something to bring the truth to light and return his body to his relatives so they could give him a dignified send-off. This experience completely took away my desire to continue doing urban explorations, so my career as a YouTuber was debut and farewell. Have you ever met people who don't like staying in hotels? I recently saw a well-known influencer make a post on her social media saying that she hated staying in hotels. According to her, she didn't like sleeping with other people's energy, but as I read the comments, I noticed that there were many comments from people who agreed with her and claimed other reasons for hating hotels. Some saying that sleeping in a bed where hundreds of people had slept before was terrible for your spirit, and others that simply the hygiene in most hotels, whether high-end or low-end, is always questionable. But the reason why this debate in social networks caught my attention is because I used to think that going to a hotel was the most normal and harmless thing in the world. I mean, you just paid to sleep in a room with clean sheets and that's it. I never understood the people who hate them, until I had my own reasons to start hating them, and believe me, my reasons for hating hotels are really good, and right now, I will tell you about them. It all started on a vacation with my friends Carla, Sylvia, and a couple of others. To be honest, I wasn't planning to go on vacation, let alone spend a day in a luxury hotel. But the opportunity presented itself, and my friends and I decided to spend a weekend at this renowned 5-star hotel. Carla was the richest of the group, and she was the one who suggested the idea. The others didn't have the luxury, so she invited us all. Naturally, I was delighted to accept, as I had never been in such an elegant place, and this occasion was perfect to experience how it felt to be rich, even if only for a weekend. Arriving at the hotel, we checked into our rooms. This was everything one would expect from a 5-star hotel. It was beautiful, luxurious, elegant, with impeccable service and breathtaking views. During our first night, as we explored the lobby, I met Andrew, the hotel manager. He was a charming man with a smile that exuded confidence. Carla was always ready to flirt, so she immediately struck up a conversation with him. However, to my surprise, Andrew seemed more interested in me. To be honest, I was never the prettiest flower in the garden. On the contrary, compared to my friends, I'm more of a simpleton girl, the typical skinny, bespectacled friend who doesn't attract too much attention from men, so I found it very strange that Andrew showed so much interest in me, being able to pick Carla, who seemed more than willing to respond to his flirting. He approached me and began to draw me out in conversation. We didn't talk much more than just a casual chat between strangers, as he had to get back to work. But the tension and chemistry between us was so obvious that both Carla and my other friends started teasing me and pushing me to ask him out. But I was too shy to do that, so if anything, I would wait for him to be the one to make the first move. The next few days, we simply enjoyed our vacation exploring the whole city. But to tell the truth, we were so enchanted with the fabulous hotel that we rarely went out. Although my friends kept telling me about Andrew, I realized I never saw him again. I know, it was all a joke, but the truth is that I really wanted to ask him out, so I told myself that the next time I saw him, I would get rid of my fears and invite him for a drink. After all, I was on vacation, and if something went wrong, I would still leave in 2 days. Several days passed as Carla decided to pay for a few more days, and we were in those last 2 days of our vacation when we all went to the hotel bar and decided to have a few drinks. I was never a big drinker, so I used to moderate my alcohol consumption. That time I drank very little, but it was kicking in much faster than I thought. I told my friends I was going to go and freshen up a bit, so I left the bar. I wanted to be somewhere quiet and not so noisy, so I went to the patio to get some fresh air. They offered to come with me, but I told them I didn't want to ruin their night, and that I would be back in a jiffy anyway. When I went out to the patio, I sat down on a deck chair and tried to relax so that the dizziness would go away. I relaxed by closing my eyes and allowing myself to fall asleep for a few moments. I woke up with a start when I felt a presence near me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Andrew said to me in a gentle voice. He was standing next to me, staring at me. I immediately ran my fingers around my mouth to make sure I wasn't drooling. Likewise, I combed my hair almost nervously, making sure my unruly mane was under control. "I think I had a bad dream. I don't feel so good," I told her a little nervously. "If I can tell, you look a little pale," she told me. "Have you had too much to drink?" I wanted to answer no, but I was still too groggy, and the only thing I remember from that moment was Andrew telling me he would take me to my room and call my friends to come see me. I thought that was a nice gesture on his part, and it seemed completely genuine, so I agreed to let him take me up to my suite. However, I never imagined that I was making the worst decision of my life. Once we got to my room, he laid me down on the bed, and I felt a little better. I was able to get up, but I was very dizzy and needed rest. I didn't know what I had taken, but I felt very sick. Andrew told me that he would give me a pill that would make me feel much better. I actually thought it would be something for the pain in my head. He put the pill in my mouth and then gave me a drink from a glass of water. For some reason, this gesture felt strange. It must have been something sweet for the way he treated me, but the truth is that at that moment I felt something strange. I wouldn't know how to explain the sensation, but it was like a small emptiness in my stomach, but I didn't give it importance. Then Andrew walked towards a drawer. I assumed he was going to look for a towel, but as he approached there, I noticed something strange. In the reflection of the bedroom mirror, a female figure appeared behind Andrew, her face distorted and covered with wounds. I startled and looked straight at him but saw nothing. "Are you okay?" asked Andrew quizzically. I just thought I saw something, sorry." He smiled at me in a sweet and captivating way and walked towards me, positioning himself perhaps too close for my comfort, and that made me a little nervous. Suddenly I noticed he was holding something shiny in his hand, something that didn't look like a towel. It was a knife, a very large and sharp one like butchers use. "What are you doing with that knife, Andrew?" I asked him somewhat uneasily, but his answer made me even more uneasy. "Something that will make you feel better," he told me with a smile, no longer charming but sinister. "This isn't funny, Andrew. I want to get out of here right now." "This is not funny," I said somewhat desperately. "Oh dear, I can't let you go. What fun would it be if I let you go after trying so hard to make you take that pill?" That last sentence horrified me. What on earth had she given me? After remaining in shock for a few seconds, I asked him, "What do you want?" starting to feel dizzy. "To have a little fun with you. I know you like me, so it won't be so bad." The man had no problem with me knowing his intentions. I tried to run for the door in desperation, but I fell and hurt my head. I felt dizzy and my mind was distorted. I managed to get up again as best I could, clinging tooth and nail to my wavering consciousness, then noticed that Andrew was making no effort to catch me as I tried to open the door, and I soon understood why. He had locked it while I was distracted by his charm. At that moment, the psycho walked towards me with his knife and I tried to dodge him, but I fell back to the floor, unable to defend myself because of how dizzy I was, and he, knowing how helpless I was at that moment, took his time walking towards me, then leaned over my body, putting his knees on each side. Being there, on top of me, he slid the edge of his knife from the beginning of my neck to my navel, cutting my dress and also my skin, which generated a great burning and left my chest exposed. He seemed to be really enjoying watching the blood flowing out of the huge wound he had inflicted on me. At that moment, I started to cry involuntarily, feeling the intense burning of the cut. But I did not beg. I would not give him the pleasure of seeing me beg. I was sure he was going to kill me anyway, so I would not grant him that. He cut me again, but now the wound was from shoulder to shoulder. Like the previous one, this was a shallow cut, but enough to cause a lot of bleeding and a lot of pain. Then he put the knife to my neck, while staring at my face, as if enjoying the terror I felt knowing I was going to die. I closed my eyes waiting for him to cut my neck, but instead, he passed the back of the knife, that is, the blunt part, and seeing my gesture of terror, he began to laugh out loud in the most macabre way I have ever seen, and said, "Not yet, dear, soon, but I have not yet finished my work." I knew I was about to die, and he was enjoying every second of psychological torture he could give me. It was like a cat playing with a mouse before killing it. I tried to get up, but I fell to the ground. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I just babbled, while my lucidity seemed to come and go. And while I was in that state, I could see that Andrew started to run the knife across my abdomen and bare chest, almost grazing it, without applying too much pressure, just enough to mark the skin and make it bleed. At that point, I was so dazed from whatever he gave me, or maybe from the adrenaline, that I no longer felt the sting of the cuts he was giving me. I could only see the blood and feel the chill of the night, as the upper half of my body was naked. At one point, I felt I was losing consciousness, and in a way I thought it was better this way, so I wouldn't feel any more pain. But then the image of my mother came into my head, and also my two sisters. And I thought of the pain my death would cause them. At that moment, I knew I could not allow it. I could not die there. I had to do something. I gathered all the little strength I had left, and the only thing I managed to do was to punch him weakly in the face. Not only did he seem unaffected, but he seemed to enjoy the fact that I still had some fight left in me. So looking very amused and smiling, Andrew raised the knife with both hands, ready to stab me. I couldn't even close my eyes. I could only see the knife coming towards me. But suddenly, he froze, as if something had stopped him in his tracks. His face turned into an expression of absolute panic, and all at once he began to choke for no apparent reason. Then I could see his neck tighten, as if someone invisible was choking him. I seized the opportunity and crawled underneath him towards the door, trying to open it again. I knew it was still locked, but still I felt the urge to open it. To my surprise, the door was open. I crawled out of the room because I couldn't feel my legs, leaving a huge trail of blood wherever I passed. And that's when I saw two waiters coming down the hall, and as best I could, I managed to articulate the word, "Help." Although seeing me, I don't think it was even necessary for me to say it. These men froze, completely horrified for an instant, until they both reacted and came running to my aid. And when they saw what was happening, they grabbed Andrew just as he was starting to move again and trying to slip out the door. The men looked at me confused and scared, but at that moment I don't know if it was because of the action of the pill or the amount of blood I had lost. I started to fade. Everything around me started to turn black, and that's the last thing I remember. Soon after, I woke up in the hospital. A police officer told me that Andrew had been arrested for attempted murder, but soon the whole truth came out. I was not Andrew's first victim. He was also convicted for the murder of a young girl to whom he had done exactly the same thing as he had done to me. Only, in that case, after cutting up her body, drawing strange figures on it, he sexually abused the victim before stabbing her in the heart. The girl's body was found in the bathtub of the hotel, and instead, A young bellboy was accused, who was the one who found the girl's body, although the boy pleaded not guilty at all times. This murder took place 5 months before he assaulted me. When I saw the photos of the woman, I recognized her immediately. She was the ghost I saw in the hotel room. Apparently, she was trying to warn me and just wanted to get me away from that room. I'm sure she was also the one who stopped this psychopath when he was about to stab me. Surely she didn't want sick Andrew to claim one more victim. Fortunately, my wounds were superficial, and I was discharged that same day, only with a few stitches where needed, and according to the doctor, the scars could fade within a few years. However, I have no problem if they don't, because every time I look at them in the mirror, I remember that the ghost of a stranger gave me a second chance at life. These scars remind me that I am a survivor and make me appreciate every day that life gives me as if it were my last. Today I cherish every moment and enjoy it, because that night I had resigned myself to the fact that my days would end there, at the hands of the most evil and sickest being I have met to this day. However, I confess that since that day, I have a terrible phobia of staying in a hotel. I was in a business meeting in a city in another state, 8 hours from my home. The meeting ended a little earlier than planned. It was 4 p.m. then, but instead of returning to my hotel, spending the night there and driving home in the morning, I made the terrible decision to go back to my hometown at once. And despite some colleagues urging me not to, I was already 3 days away from home, and I missed my wife and daughter too much. So seeing that I had a time gap, I wanted to take advantage of it to go back and spend the night at home. I was driving through the winding mountain roads, 3 hours away from reaching my destination, but even though I had already warned my wife that I would be home to sleep, the rain was coming down so hard that it made it almost impossible to see the road. I had been driving for 5 hours straight, and I could feel myself starting to fall asleep. I rolled down the window a bit to let the cold air wake me up, but soon after I was falling asleep again on this road full of curves, samples that on one side had steep cliffs, and on the other, a lot of large trees. So I decided to stop because I realized that in that state of tiredness, it would be very easy to go off the road and end up embedded in a tree, or worse. I looked for signs to nearby towns, hoping to come across a McDonald's or something so I could grab a bite to eat and a strong coffee. If I had 30 minutes to an hour to get myself together and regain energy, I would get home and see my wife and daughter after 3 long days without them. Suddenly, I saw a road sign indicating that the next rest stop was coming up next to me. This one listed only a gas station, a motel, and a restaurant, so I didn't hesitate to stop there. The restaurant was about 4 miles away, so I drove there trying not to fall asleep. When I got there, I saw that it was a small area. There were 3 streetlights. On one side of the road was the motel, and on the other was a gas station and a restaurant. I parked at the restaurant and went inside. The restaurant was somewhat empty. There was an old man sitting at the bar eating a piece of apple pie and talking to the cooks. To my right, a group of teenagers were laughing loudly at one of the tables. I made eye contact with one of the waitresses. She was older, about 50 years old. Her cheeks were tinted bright pink with a very strong blush. Her lips were a deep red, and her false eyelashes looked like they had been put on with glue. I remembered how my wife always complained about false eyelashes and how difficult they were to wear. The waitress gave me a big smile, revealing a bit of lipstick on her front teeth. She said, "Sit anywhere you want, honey," with a bit of mischief in her voice. In response, I smiled and nodded. I sat down in a booth as far away from the group of teenagers as possible, and within a minute, the same waitress was at my table. "Hi, handsome." She smiled, wiped her lipstick-stained teeth, and said to me, "What can I buy you to drink?" "I'd love some coffee," I said. "Oh, great. So tell me, what brings such a handsome man here today?" She continued with her playful, flirtatious tone, so I told her I was driving home from a work trip, as I promised my wife I would be home tonight. I made it clear that I had a wife, but she appeared not to care in the least, and kept asking me questions in a very flirtatious manner. I played along, but just for fun. She asked me my name, I told her, but before I could ask hers, which I wasn't going to do, she told me her name. Her name was Judith. The flirtatious cradle-robber waitress brought me my coffee and asked me since what time I was driving. I told her that since early. Then she stressed me that I should not go ahead with that rain. She told me that there had been many accidents in the last days due to the rains, and that I should take advantage of the stop to rest for a while and wait for the intensity of the downpour to decrease before continuing the road to my city. Honestly, I thought he was right. The truth is that besides the tiredness, the rain was very intense and did not allow me to see the road. Even before reaching that place, I was about to leave the road and fall straight into the cliff for not being able to see well a warning curve. "Do you want something else or just that coffee?" I took a moment to look at the menu and she winked at me as she left. She brought me a glass of water and a cup of coffee, and as she placed both on the table, her eyes went wide and she tried to make eye contact with me. She made an attempt at intense eye contact, which made me a little uneasy, so I avoided it, but she ducked her head to look me in the eye anyway. "Any idea what you want to eat?" she asked as she looked at me intensely, biting her lips, again filling her teeth with lipstick as she did so. Yeah. Can you get a double cheeseburger and double meat?" She scribbled on her pad and said to me, "Okay." I nodded and she winked at me again as she left. While I waited, I texted my wife to give her an update. Judith was laughing with another waitress and they kept looking at me. I gave them an awkward smile. I really regretted flirting with her. One of the cooks yelled that my order was ready and then she playfully yelled back, "Ready, Daddy, I'm coming for you." At that moment, I felt all my blood rush to my cheeks. The waitresses laughed and everyone in the place turned to look at me. "Leave him alone, Judith. Look, you made him blush," one of her companions told her. She laughed mischievously and said it was a joke. Then she brought me my hamburger. As she placed it on the table, she patted my arm, giving me what I think was supposed to be a seductive look. I nodded and barely smiled back. And as I ate my burger, I called my wife again and thought that would calm Judith's hormones. I thought that if she saw me talking to my wife, she would calm down a little when she realized I was a committed man, but that didn't happen. My wife told me that she missed me and that my daughter stayed up waiting for me for a while before she went to sleep. I assured her I would be home as soon as possible and told her I loved her. I tried to do it out loud so Judith would hear. After I finished my hamburger, I felt more awake and ready for the last few hours of driving. Even the intensity of the rain dropped. But as I was getting ready to leave, Judith brought a milkshake courtesy of the house, that's what she said, as she put it in front of me. I would be lying if I said I was discouraged. I was excited to get a free smoothie, and to be honest, despite what happened next, objectively, I must say it was a delicious smoothie. After I finished my drink, Judith picked up my plates and left me the bill. Every time she came to my table, she kept stroking my arm. And when she left the bill, I tried to dodge it, but then her manner and demeanor changed. She went from being sickeningly sweet to being very angry with me. As I wrote down the tip amount and signed my name, my head started to feel heavy, the room started to spin. I looked at the waitresses and they weren't paying attention to me except Judith, who glanced at me every now and then. I tried to stand up to leave, but I collapsed and everything went black all at once. When I woke up, I was lying in a motel bed with my hands cuffed to the bedpost. I looked around and the sun was shining through the curtains. Someone had folded my clothes and placed them on the desk next to the bed. The bathroom door was ajar and I could see someone was getting dressed, a woman. "Hi," I called out loudly. Then Judith's head popped through the bathroom door. "Oh, you're finally awake." She came out with her makeup smeared, and I tried to pull at my restraints, but I couldn't get free of them. They were wrapped around the bed in a way that I couldn't just get up and run. "What happened?" I asked as my heart pounded against my chest at full speed, and I looked around in bewilderment. This all looked really bad, and I had no idea what happened. "What time is it?" I asked him again. "It's about 10:30. She smiled and sat down next to me. Placing her hand on my chest, I tried to shake it off, but her hand remained there. "Don't worry. I told your wife that I gave us all a good scare in that restaurant when you collapsed. The cooks helped me get you across the street to the motel so you could sleep and rest. I guess you were more tired than you thought." She sounded very amused when she said that. "Why am I like this?" I asked. And she smiled deviously, saying, "Why do you think?" and winked at me. I told her I needed to call my wife, and she reminded me that she already talked to her, then kissed me on the chest with her awful red lipstick, and frankly, it became hard to breathe. I kept wondering why I was only in my boxers over and over in my head, and I confronted Judith about it. She just turned around and retrieved my phone from the desk, sat down next to me, curled up on my chest, ran a hand around my neck and started playing with my hair. Meanwhile, I was still with my arms tied and couldn't get her off me. I told her to get off me, but instead she showed me the messages she sent to my wife. She sent him racy pictures of her and me together, and lots of them. Also videos of her on top of me, but she didn't include my face in any of the pictures and videos so he wouldn't know I was passed out. I wanted to vomit at the sight of that. "Get away from me." I screamed at her in great anger and shook violently to get her away from my body. "Take the handcuffs off me right now, you crazy fucking rapist." I yelled at her one more time, and then she seemed confused. It was as if in her mind, everything that was happening was consensual, as if it wasn't about her drugging me and then stripping me naked and tying me to a bed against my will. Up until that point, she had been flirtatious and seductive, or so she thought. But after I told her that, her expression changed drastically to one of anger. However, she quickly softened her face again, and it was as if all of a sudden she remembered something. And then she said to me, "Don't worry. When you meet Brian, you'll feel better." "Who the hell is Brian, Judith?" She was offended and replied, "My son. I told you all about him last night, but apparently you didn't pay attention to me." "Oh my God, how clueless you are. I'll have to work hard on that. But never mind. Trust me. When you meet him, you'll know you made the right decision." "What the hell decision are you talking about, Judith, for God's sake?" I spat the words at her, feeling very frustrated. This woman was completely crazy, and I had lost every ounce of patience I had in my being. I just wanted her to let me go home to my wife and daughter. And at that moment, I regretted to the bone that I had stopped at that restaurant, even that I had not waited at the hotel and left in the morning. Because if I had, I would not be going through this whole nightmare. Feeling on the verge of insanity, I said, "Judith, I passed out after you gave me I don't know what crap in that 1,000 damn juice, and I woke up in this damn motel room stuck with your rotten ass all around me cackling nonsense. Do you understand that?" I was now really offended and very angry. Before I knew it, she jumped on me and slapped me about 4 times, but that wasn't going to shut me up. On the contrary, it enraged me even more, so I started yelling at her, demanding that she remove my handcuffs, and she seemed horrified at the idea. Judith started yelling at me that I was a jerk, a bad thank you, that I had taken advantage of her, and that I was going to pay for it. And right after she said that last sentence, her eyes lit up with an idea, and then she said, "You know what? I know what will make you feel better." Next, he crawled on top of me, straddling me, and I started screaming at him to get off of me. I started squirming and screaming for help, shaking my body as much as I could so he couldn't sit on me, and thankfully it worked. Once she was off, I kicked her in the stomach and she stumbled and fell backwards. hitting her head on the corner of the desk and falling unconscious on the floor beside the bed. "Judith!" I called out to her but got no response. Relief flooded my system for a moment, but then I saw blood coming from her head and her body was turning very white. I realized that she was dead. This frightened me, but then I told myself that everything would be all right because, after all, I killed her in self-defense. My mind immediately went to my wife. She saw those horrible images and nothing guaranteed me that she would believe my stories about what happened. I prayed that she would. At that point, I started screaming for help again, but it was hours before the cleaners entered the room. They were surprised to see a man handcuffed to the bed and a dead woman on the floor. Fortunately, one of them grabbed a towel to cover me. It took a while for the police to arrive, as we were in a motel room in the middle of nowhere. But when they finally arrived, they removed my handcuffs and took my statement. Fortunately, they believed me. How could they not if I was trapped and had irrefutable proof of Judith's actions, including the messages she sent to my wife? And speaking of her, when I called her, I noticed she had been crying quite a bit. She weakly asked me how it all happened and made me promise her that I wasn't lying to her. I swore to her by all the saints that I was telling her the truth and that the police report could back me up. Fortunately, my wife believed me. She understood and was very worried about me and what I had just endured. She said she knew I would never cheat on her with an old hag like that, and of course she was right. After we talked, I knew she would be fine, and I honestly didn't feel any pity for Judith. She got what she deserved. However, I thought a lot about her son because, as a father myself, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him after his mother's death. And just when I thought about it, I felt some guilt. But then I learned that actually Judith's son was 26 years old and not living with her. That made me feel a lot better. However, when I look back on things, I realize that I could have avoided that whole nightmare if I had made the right decisions when I should have. I was always a gambler. I'm not talking about cards or dice, but life itself. I loved living on the edge, defying the rules, looking for excitement around every corner. I was the kind of person who saw the world as a big chessboard, and every move was a chance to win, or so I thought. But my last move was a checkmate that locked me in a cell. I worked at a technology company, and I had discovered a flaw in our security system. It was a huge vulnerability, a backdoor that could be opened to access any confidential company information. At first, I just saw it as a challenge, an opportunity to show my ingenuity. But then greed started whispering bad ideas in my ear. I thought of all the money I could make selling that information. Millions, maybe. I could buy a mansion, a yacht, travel the world, buy a supermodel girlfriend. In short, lead the life I had always wanted, and the very idea haunted me. For weeks, I worked in silence, perfecting a plan that would allow me to exploit that vulnerability without leaving a trace. And eventually, I found it. Finally, the day came. I connected my computer to the company network and ran the code I had created. The data began to flow, downloading to an external hard drive. Adrenaline flooded through me as I watched my plan unfold to perfection. But I didn't count on one factor. One of my coworkers had noticed something strange about my behavior and reported it to security. So once the plagiarism was discovered, he was the first to come under the spotlight. When I realized I had been caught, I tried to erase all the evidence, but it was too late. The police broke into my apartment while I was trying to escape. They took me to the police station in handcuffs. At first, I denied everything, but the evidence was too strong. Plus, my alibi quickly collapsed when the video captured by the security camera, which I didn't even know existed, came to light. The hard drive with the stolen data, the malicious code I had created. Everything was there to incriminate me. I felt like I was a movie criminal, and in a way I was. I just hadn't had time to enjoy even a little bit of the joys of my mischief. The trial was quick. I was found guilty of intellectual property theft and sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only 3 years from now. I was ruined, and to top it off, I also had to face embarrassment in front of my peers and my bosses, who had placed a lot of trust in me. I felt like complete garbage, and as they took me to the cell, I couldn't help but feel a deep sadness and a lot of regret. I had lost everything I had built, my job, my reputation, and now my freedom. Life in prison is a nightmare. The days are long and monotonous, and the loneliness is overwhelming. I often wonder what drove me to make such a stupid decision. Was it greed, ego, or simply the need to feel important? Now from my cell, I see the world with different eyes. I realize that happiness cannot be bought, that money is not everything. I have learned a very hard lesson, a lesson I hope others can learn from my mistake. Ambition can be a powerful force, but it can also destroy lives. Sometimes, the best move is not to play,